In mysterious antiquity lies the tale of Carthage, a maritime power that rivaled Rome in the ancient world. Founded by Phoenician colonists in the 9th century BC, it grew into a formidable empire that dominated trade routes across the Mediterranean. Its rise to prominence was marked by conflicts with Greek city-states and clashes with Rome in the Punic Wars. Carthage's wealth and influence extended from North Africa to Iberia, Sicily, and beyond, yet, despite its grandeur, Carthage met its tragic demise in the flames of war. Join me, and we can unravel the captivating history of Carthage. This is a two-part video. Today, I will cover up to the Sicilian Wars. You'll find out what they are later. So relax, get comfortable, and we can begin. In the ancient world, Carthage emerged as a crucial Phoenician settlement in the western Mediterranean, strategically positioned to facilitate trade from cities like Sidon and Tyre in present-day Lebanon. The Phoenicians, renowned sailors and traders, established colonies along the Mediterranean coast to expand their commerce and secure vital resources. The city of Carthage, situated around the hill of Byrsa, grew into a powerful city-state, paying tribute to neighboring Libyan tribes and potentially governed by officials from Tyre. As a key hub for maritime trade, Carthage thrived amidst the landscape of competing empires and emerging Greek colonization, shaping its destiny as a formidable force of antiquity. Carthage was among the Phoenician settlements strategically positioned in the western Mediterranean, serving as vital hubs for trade originating from cities like Sidon and Tyre, and many more dotted around the Phoenician region. During the 10th century BC, the eastern Mediterranean region was inhabited by various Semitic people, with those residing in what is now Lebanon being referred to as Phoenicians by the Greeks. The Phoenician language bore close resemblance to ancient Hebrew, which has allowed us the aid in translating Phoenician inscriptions, as we can use it as a bit of a reference. Trade, both overland and maritime, was fundamental to the prosperity of the Phoenician cities, which boasted major ports facilitating commerce. To secure rest stops for their merchant fleets, maintain control over valuable natural resources, or engage in independent trade ventures, the Phoenicians established numerous colonial cities along the Mediterranean coastline, extending from Iberia all the way to the Black Sea. Iberia, by the way, is the old word for Spain. The impetus for founding these cities stemmed from the need to invigorate trade to meet the tributes demanded by ruling empires such as Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, as well as from concerns over potential Greek colonization in strategic Mediterranean trade routes. The initial wave of Phoenician colonization coincided with a period when neighboring kingdoms, including Hellenic, which is Greek, and the Hittite realms, experienced what we call a dark age, possibly following the disruptions caused by the Sea Peoples. Video on the Bronze Age collapse in our Bronze Age playlist, if you are interested in that. Carthage's early settlement encompassed the area surrounding a hill known as Byrsa, and regularly paid tribute to the tribes that surrounded it. It is believed that Carthage may have been initially governed by a Tyrian-appointed official, identified by the Greeks as a king. Utica, a prominent Phoenician city in northwest Africa at the time, supported Carthage's establishment through cooperation and trade relations. The Phoenician civilization, centered around the city of Tyre, established numerous trading outposts across the Mediterranean, and quite a few of them too, while they founded around 300 colonies in regions of our modern-day thinking such as Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria and Spain, and the coastal areas of Libya. These settlements generally lacked the population and resources to become fully self-sustaining cities. Most Phoenician colonies had fewer than 1,000 inhabitants, but a few, including Carthage, grew into large, independent cities, and eventually city-states in their own right. Phoenician control extended to Cyprus, Sardinia, Corsica, Malta, and the Balearic Islands, with minor possessions in Crete and Sicily. However, their settlements in Sicily and other areas were frequently in conflict with Greek communities. While the Phoenicians briefly controlled parts of Sicily, their influence remained limited to coastal regions. The Phoenicians initially established colonies along the trade routes to Iberia, Africa, and the Mediterranean islands, focusing on regions rich in mineral resources. Tyre served as the primary economic and political center of the Phoenician world, but its power declined after sieges and its eventual destruction by Alexander the Great. Leadership subsequently passed to Sidon, and eventually to Carthage. While the colonies indeed paid tribute to Tyre or Sidon, Carthage eventually emerged as a dominant force, appointing its own officials to govern towns and exerting direct control over colonies. It got so big that eventually they decided, there's no need for us to pay tribute to these tribes. We are much tougher than they are. If they have any problem with it, good luck getting through the walls. Carthage amassed vast wealth through trade and commerce, becoming one of the wealthiest cities of its time. However, few remnants of its riches remain, due to the perishable nature of its traded goods, which included textiles, metals, foodstuffs, and, rather unfortunately, slaves. But everybody was trading slaves back in those days. Carthage also traded in valuable commodities, like Tyrian purple dye. Of course, purple was the most expensive dye back in those days, as it was produced from the blood of shellfish. Very difficult process. But they figured it out, and of course, upon figuring this out, you have the opportunity to export a luxury good. And there was nothing more luxurious in those days than real, pure Tyrian purple dye, all the way from the luxurious Carthage. Mogador, a Phoenician colony in northwestern Africa, was a notable center for Tyrian dye production, and while quite small, became quite wealthy. Carthage, founded by Phoenicians from the Levant, derives its name from the Phoenician term meaning new city. Ancient sources offer varying accounts of its foundation, with some dating it as early as 1215, and others suggesting a later date of 814, which is generally accepted by modern historians, so we are going to go with that as well. Perhaps new information will come to light, but for the sake of the best practices of intellectual honesty for the video, we're going to go where the majority of academic research puts us and settle our date at around 814. Give or take a few years, why not? So how did it all come about? Well, generally with cities this age, the history kind of blends into mythology when it comes to the founding. We have a lot of old stories about it, but the main one goes like this. According to tradition, Tyrian settlers led by Queen Elisa, also known as Dido, established Carthage. Dido's story involves court intrigue in Tyre, where her brother, Pygmalion, the new king, kills her husband, the chief priest Acarbas. In response to this, Dido flees Tyre with nobles and a fleet carrying a generous amount of royal treasure. Eventually, they landed in northwest Africa. While taking a look around and enjoying the no doubt sunny weather and decent crop-growing conditions, she founds Carthage, accompanied by temple maidens that were taken aboard the ships. Well, after everything is all set up and established, Dido rejects the marriage proposal of a local tribal chief, opting to honor her husband by taking her own life. How unfortunate. So what happened next? Well, of course, all the people left behind had to make a good run of it. Yes, the queen was gone, but they weren't going to move all the way back to Tyre, especially with the new king there, who would perhaps not welcome their homecoming with open arms. Carthage eventually flourished under its new Phoenician leaderships, and eventually it surpassed the other Phoenician settlements. Legends of Dido's founding of Carthage persisted for centuries, with her being revered as a goddess in the city's mythology. These tales, preserved by historians like Pompeius Trogus, contribute to the rich tapestry of Carthaginian lore and its enduring cultural significance. The Roman poet Virgil portrays Dido, the legendary founder of Carthage, as a tragic figure in his epic poem, the Aeneid. In this work, Dido is depicted as a queen who falls in love with the Trojan hero Aeneas when he arrives in Carthage. However, their romance is unfortunately cut short when the god Jupiter reminds Aeneas of his destiny to found Rome. Aeneas reluctantly leaves Dido, who is devastated by his departure, and ultimately takes her own life by throwing herself onto a funeral pyre. Not a good way to go. Virgil's rendition of Dido's story draws on both historical accounts and mythical elements. While some details may be historically inaccurate, the tale serves to capture the essence of Carthaginian mythology and cultural identity. Dido's tragic fate, as depicted by Virgil, resonates with the themes of love, loss, and destiny that are so pervasive in the Greek and Roman poetry of the classical era. Now, despite the legendary nature of Dido's story, it offers valuable insights into how ancient Carthaginians viewed their city's origins and the cultural significance they attributed to it. While the precise historical details may be obscured by myth and legend, the narrative of Dido's founding of Carthage remained for a very long time the very symbol of the city's heritage. Now, the emergence of Carthage as a dominant economic and political power in the Western Mediterranean can be attributed to various factors that are interconnected quite strongly. Carthage's strategic geographic location played a crucial role. Situated on the central shore of the Gulf of Tunis, it provided access to the Mediterranean Sea while being shielded from the region's stormy weather. Additionally, its proximity to the Strait of Sicily made it a key point for maritime trade between East and West. The terrain of Carthage offered its own natural defenses. Built on a hilly triangular peninsula backed by the Lake of Tunis, the city was very easily defensible. The citadel on the hill of Byrsa provided a strategic vantage point overlooking the sea, enhancing its defensive capabilities. Carthage's position at the crossroads of the major trade routes facilitated commerce. It served as a crucial trading center, connecting the Tyrian colony of Cadiz in southern Spain with the northern Mediterranean regions of Sicily, Italy, and Greece. This, of course, enabled Carthage to thrive economically by engaging in trade and exchanging goods and resources. Everybody stopped off at Carthage. It was kind of the thing that you'd do. Have to pull into port and rest for a little while. And it was a nice place to stop at. The influx of refugees from Phoenicia during periods of conflicts with the Babylonians and the Persians likely contributed to Carthage's cultural and economic development. These refugees may have brought with them the tradition and expertise of Tyre, enhancing Carthage's cultural identity and economic prowess. And the more this prowess was exacerbated, the bigger their cultural identity grew and the richer they got, the more people wanted to come. And they did come. Overall, Carthage's strategic location, its easily defensible terrain, its role as a trading hub, and cultural influences from Phoenicia all contributed to its rise as a dominant power in the Western Mediterranean region. It really had everything going for it. During the 7th century BC, Carthage emerged as a prominent commercial center in the Western Mediterranean. While the mainland Greeks initiated colonization efforts in Sicily and Italy, the Phoenicians retreated to the western part of Sicily, and Carthage undertook its first recorded independent action by colonizing Ibiza. By the end of the 7th century, Carthage had become one of the leading commercial hubs in the region, setting the stage for its subsequent expansion and hegemony. Unlike Rome, which initially focused on conquering adjacent lands, Carthage's dependence on trade led to the development of an overseas hegemony before expanding inland into Africa. The city's early expansion was influenced by its need to protect its trade network rather than territorial acquisition. This approach may have been influenced by the power of the Libyan tribes, which may have initially prevented Carthage from expanding into the surrounding areas. But it was mainly due to their incredible reliance on maritime trade. Yes, they were engaging in much overland trade as well, but maritime trade was what Carthage was really known for. And very quickly, this led to them making quite significant advancements in the ships that they needed for the trade, not only for economic, commercial purposes, but of course you have to protect your ships from pirates, don't you? So this of course led to the brilliant Carthaginian quinquiremes that they became synonymous with in later times, ones that the Romans copied. That's right, one of them washed up on a beach one day, a shipwrecked quinquireme. The Romans were so fascinated with it that they made an exact copy and based their entire navy around it. Of course, they couldn't get it exactly right because they didn't quite have the same wood that the Carthaginians had, not the same materials, but they did the best they could. But this is an event later explained in my video about the Punic Wars, which came much later. Don't want to give away any spoilers. Anyway, back to where we were. Until around 550 BC, Carthage paid rent to the Libyans for the use of land in the city, surroundings, and Cape Bon for agricultural purposes. However, by around 450, Carthage had expanded its territory inland into Tunisia. The degree of control exerted by Carthage over its territories varied from place to place, with harsher measures imposed on territories near the city. The Carthaginian hegemony shared characteristics with other ancient powers, such as the Delian League, Spartan Kingdom, and the Roman Republic. Territories under Carthaginian control faced varying levels of suppression. while some cities retaining internal autonomy, others were subjected to more stringent measures. Now, Carthaginian citizenship was a very exclusive club, and the state's focus was on protecting trade infrastructure rather than expanding the citizen body. Unlike the Roman Republic, which expanded its citizenry through wars and alliances, Carthage did not have a similar system to increase its citizen numbers. Carthaginian citizens were primarily involved in commerce, and prolonged wars were seen as detrimental to commercial activities. Now, this attitude to avoid conflict would later on come back to bite them, as we'll find out in later videos. Carthage initially had a system of kingship, where kings were elected by the Carthaginian Senate and served specific terms. Initially, the kings were war leaders, administrators, and had religious duties. While Aristotle notes that kings were elected based on their merit rather than by the people, the crown and military commands could also be brought by the highest bidder. Over time, military command shifted to professional officers, and a pair of suffets gradually replaced the king in some civic functions. Eventually, kings were no longer elected, and suffets became purely civic officials, elected by the people. Two prominent families in Carthage, the Magonids and the Hanno or Magnus family, held kingship between 550 and 310. The Magonid family played a significant role in Carthage's overseas expansion during this period. Records of other elected kings or their impact on Carthaginian history are pretty scarce. There's some thought that the Magonids and the Hanno families made some efforts to remove historical references to the other competing lineages, but this is all a bit of speculation. Now, during the 11th and 9th centuries BC, the Phoenicians encountered little resistance in establishing their monopoly on trade. The rise of the Etruscans as a sea power did not significantly hinder them, as their power was pretty much localized around Italy. The Etruscans, by the way, is what we refer to as the civilization around Tuscany, pre-Roman Italians, we can say that. Now, trade between Carthage and Etruscan cities developed, regulated by treaties, despite occasional piracy. Carthage's economic success in reliance on shipping led to the creation of a powerful navy to protect its interests. As Carthage's power and hegemony grew, it came into increasing conflict with the Greeks, who also sought control of the central Mediterranean. These conflicts, spanning from 600 to 310, led to the creation of Carthage's overseas empire under the military leadership of kings. Now, as for the Etruscans, also in conflict with the Greeks, well, they actually became allies with Carthage during these struggles. By the middle of the 6th century BC, Carthage had emerged as a fully independent power, a maritime empire. Under the rule of Mago and his Magonid family, Carthage became the dominant power among the Phoenician colonies in the western Mediterranean, including nearby Utica. Mago, who ruled in the 6th century BC, introduced the practice of recruiting the army from subject peoples and mercenaries due to Carthage's small population, enabling a defense for its widespread empire. Carthaginian traders established partnerships with nearby peoples, including the Numidian Berbers to the west along African coast and Berbers in Libya to the east. Carthage founded numerous trading stations that developed into cities across the western Mediterranean. These included Palermo in Sicily, Nora in Sardinia, Ibiza in the Balearic Islands, as well as Lixus in Mauritania and other regions along the Iberian Peninsula. Carthage also formed alliances with the Etruscans, who held sway in northwest Italy, and maintained a commercial monopoly on southern Iberia through a Punic-Etruscan treaty. Punic sailors ventured into the Atlantic Ocean. Himilco, a merchant sailor from Carthage, explored the northern Atlantic coast, possibly as far back as modern-day Brittany, around 500 BC. Carthage eventually replaced the Iberian city of Tartessus as the main conduit for the tin trade from Brittany into the Mediterranean. And the tin trade at that time was absolutely huge. As big as Coca-Cola in our modern age. Everybody wanted it, and it was everywhere. Hanno the navigator explored the southern Atlantic coasts along Africa, journeying past the river Gambia. Carthaginian traders kept their routes and activities very secretive, particularly guarding the straits leading to the Atlantic from Greek interference. Must maintain that monopoly, of course. The conflict between Carthage and the Greeks in the western Mediterranean was primarily driven by economic competition rather than ideological or cultural differences. Both sides were motivated by their economic interests rather than a crusade to impose their ideals on each other. Carthage's trade network, inherited from Tyre, relied on maintaining a monopoly by keeping commercial rivals at bay. Initially, Carthaginian goods were of lower quality compared to Greek products, and Carthage acted as an intermediary between mineral-rich Iberia and the eastern Mediterranean. The Greek colonies posed a triple threat to Carthage. They offered superior products, threatened Carthage's distribution network, and targeted Punic shipping. This economic vulnerability prompted Carthage to confront the Greeks and protect its commercial interests. Greek colonization in the western Mediterranean began with settlements like Cumae in Italy and Naxos in Sicily after 750. Over the following century, numerous Greek colonies emerged along southern Italian and Sicilian coastlines. The first recorded Greek contact with Tartessus around 638 BC marked a turning point, leading to active warfare between Carthage and the Greeks by 600. Carthaginian interests in Iberia, Sardinia, and Sicily were threatened, resulting in conflicts with various Greek city-states. One significant event was the defeat of Greek settlers by Phoenician cities in Sicily, who aided the Elymians of Segesta against the Greek city of Selinus in 580. The defeated Greeks established themselves in Lipara, which became a hub for piracy, posing a threat to all maritime commerce. Carthage, under the leadership of a king named Malchus, successfully warred against Libyan tribes and then defeated the Greeks in Sicily. However, Malchus suffered a severe defeat in Sardinia and was subsequently banished, leading to internal strife in Carthage. In the 530s, a naval struggle ensued between the Phoenicians, Greeks, and Etrusco-Punic allies, resulting in the loss of Corsica to the Etruscans and Sardinia to Carthage. The conflict escalated, with Rome eventually entering into a treaty with Carthage in 509 to define their respective commercial zones. The competition between Carthage and the Greeks was driven by their parallel trading activities and disputes over influence and control of commercial spheres, particularly in Sicily. Despite intermittent warfare and setbacks, Carthage continued to expand its commercial sphere, establishing its authority among the Numidian Berber peoples and exploring opportunities in the Atlantic. A legend between Carthage and Cyrene describes the agreement on a border in Libya, marked by the Altars of the Phileni, which later serves as the territorial boundary between the Western and Eastern Roman empires. This legend highlights the pragmatic approach both powers took to delineate their spheres of influence. Now Mago I, a prominent general of the Carthaginian army, rose to power in Carthage around 550, along with his sons Hasdrubal I and Hamilcar I. Together, they established Carthage's warlike tradition through successful military campaigns in Africa, Sicily, and Sardinia. In 546, Phocaeans, fleeing from a Persian invasion, established the city of Alalia in Corsica, becoming a threat to Etruscan and Punic commerce. In response, a Carthaginian-Etruscan alliance expelled the Greeks from Corsica between 540 and 35 after the Battle of Alalia. This victory ensured Etruscan control of Corsica and Carthaginian dominance in Sardinia, effectively halting Greek expansion westward. Subsequent conflicts with Greek Massalia resulted in Carthage losing battles, but successfully safeguarding Phoenician interests in Iberia and closing the Strait of Gibraltar to Greek shipping. The Massalians retained their colonies in eastern Iberia above Cape Now, where southern Iberia remained closed to the Greeks. Carthage's support for the Phoenician colony of Gades contributed to the collapse of Tartessos around 530, either through armed conflict or by simply disrupting the Greek trade. Carthage also besieged and captured Gades during this period. Well, a little later, around 525, when the Persians took control of Cyrene, Carthage may have avoided conflict with the Persian Empire when the Phoenicians refused to lend ships to Cambyses for an African expedition. Carthage had possibly paid irregular tribute to the Persian Empire during this time. Hasdrubal, Mago's son, was elected king 11 times and received triumphs 4 times, marking him the only Carthaginian to receive such honors. His death from battle wounds sustained in Sardinia marked the end of a 25-year struggle in the region against resistance from native Sardinians and support from allies like Sybaris. Carthage faced and repelled colonization attempts near Leptis Magna in Libya by the Spartan prince Doreus after a 3-year war from 514 to 511. Doreus was later defeated and killed at Eryx in Sicily in 510, while attempting to establish a foothold in western Sicily. Hamilcar, either the brother or perhaps the nephew of Hasdrubal, succeeded him to power in Carthage after serving with him in Sardinia and quelling the Sardinian revolt in 509. And he would have to deal with further issues later on, as we will find out in the next video, where we will talk about the events of and after the Sicilian Wars. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. If you are fast asleep, I hope that you are in a beautiful dream, whisked off to some ancient land where heroes are all around. Just imagine it. I will see you in the next video, where we continue our exploration into Carthage. Good night, everybody. Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of our video on the history of Carthage. If you've not watched the first video, I refer you to the description of this one, where you will find a link that will take you straight there. But if you have watched the first one, or if you simply refuse to do so, then welcome to the second part. Allow us to pick up from where we left off, as we were approaching the Sicilian War. The defeat in the First Sicilian War had significant repercussions, both politically and economically, for Carthage. On the political front, it led to the overthrow of the old aristocratic government, marking the rise of the Carthaginian Republic. While a king continued to be elected, real power shifted to the Senate and the Tribunal of 104, with the position of suffet gaining greater influence. Economically, Carthage faced challenges as sea trade routes to the Middle East were blocked by mainland Greeks, and Magna Graecia imposed a boycott on Carthaginian traders. In response to all of this, Carthage redirected its trade focus to the west and developed caravan-based trade with the east. Gisco, son of Hamilcar, was exiled during this period, and for the next 7 decades, Carthage refrained from engaging in conflict with the Greeks or assisting their adversaries. This withdrawal from Greek affairs suggests that Carthage suffered significant setbacks after the defeat at Himera. The attention of Carthage at this time shifted towards expansion in Africa and Sardinia, as well as the exploration of new markets in Africa and Europe. Notable figures such as Hannibal, Hasdrubal, and Sappho, along with Hanno, Gisco, and Hamilcar, are believed to have played key roles in these endeavors. However, specific details about their contributions are scarce. By around 450 BC, Carthage had ceased paying tribute to the Libyans, and a series of forts were erected in Sardinia to consolidate Carthaginian control over the island's entire coastline. Hanno, possibly the renowned Hanno the Navigator, and Himilco, potentially identified as Himilco the Navigator, are believed to have conducted their expeditions around 460 to 425, and sometime after 450 BC respectively. Hanno the Navigator ventured down the African coast as far as Cameroon, while Himilco the Navigator explored further up the European Atlantic coast, even all the way up to Britain, in search of the much-renowned mineral of tin, which the trade of such a mineral was very important at this time. These explorations occurred during a period when Carthage was at the height of its power. If Hanno and Himilco are indeed descendants of Mago, it suggests that Carthage recovered rapidly from this previously perceived crippled state. However, if they are not the Magonid family, these expeditions might have occurred before 500, indicating a longer period of vulnerability for Carthage. During various conflicts and wars in Sicily, Carthage remained largely uninvolved. It did not participate in the activities of the Sicilian chief Ducetius against Syracuse, the wars between Acragas and Syracuse, or the conflicts between the Etruscans, Syracuse, and Cumae. Carthage's fleet also played no recorded role in the decisive naval battle of Cumae in 474, where the Etruscan fleet suffered a major defeat at the hands of the Greeks. Carthage had also abstained from involvement in the Peloponnesian War, declined to aid Segesta against Selinus in 415, and refrained from supporting Athens against Syracuse in 413. There is limited information about any military actions Carthage may have undertaken in Africa or Iberia during this period. However, in 410, when Segesta was under attack from Selinus once again, the Carthaginian Senate agreed to provide assistance. By 410, Carthage had expanded its territory significantly, conquering much of modern-day Tunisia, establishing and strengthening colonies in northwest Africa and sponsoring an expedition across the Sahara Desert. However, in the same year, 410, Carthage faced setbacks as its Iberian colonies began to cede, depriving the city-state of a major source of silver and copper. In 410, Hannibal Margo, son of Gisco and the grandson of Hamilcar, who had perished at Himera in 480, led a small contingent to Sicily to assist Sagesta. There he routed the army of Selinus, marking a significant victory. Emboldened by this success, Hannibal Margo returned to Sicily in 409 with a much larger force. His troops landed at Motia and swiftly captured Selinus. By the way, Selinus was modern-day Selinunte. We captured Selinus before Syracuse could mount an effective intervention, effectively taking them by surprise. Subsequently, Hannibal's forces laid siege to and razed Himera. Despite the efforts of the Syracusans to intervene, they did not get very far. Now, following this battle, Hannibal ordered the execution of approximately 3,000 Greek prisoners. Why did he do this? Well, remember when I said Hamilcar died at Himera? Well, this was the retribution for this, and the city of Himera was utterly demolished as well. Interestingly, the Carthaginians refrained from launching attacks on Syracuse or Acragas, instead departing for Africa, but not without filling their pockets with the spoils of war first. They continued to enjoy their victory and the spoils of war for a 3-year period of time, in which there was a hiatus on all the hostilities in Sicily. Now on to Dionysius I of Syracuse. Now during his reign, he engaged in 4 conflicts with Carthage, each of them giving him mixed outcomes. In response to Greek raids on Punic Sicilian territories in 406, Hannibal Margo led a second Carthaginian expedition, potentially with the goal of asserting control over all of Sicily. The campaign began with an assault on Acragas itself, during which the Carthaginian forces were devastated by a plague. And the plague was so bad that it actually managed to claim the life of Hannibal Margo himself. Well, regardless of your social class, or how much money you have, how much power you have, none of that is going to stop the plague. His relative and successor, Himilco, the son of Hanno, then seized Acragas and subsequently captured Gela and Camarina, consistently defeating Dionysius's army in battle. Eventually, Himilco brokered a treaty with Dionysius, potentially prompted by another outbreak of the plague, allowing Greek settlers to return to Selinus, Acragas, Camarina, and Gela, albeit under the Carthaginian tribute. The Elymian and Sicel cities remained autonomous for both Carthaginian and Greek influence, and Dionysius retained his position as a tyrant of Syracuse, which he had, by the way, usurped from another. However, the returning Carthaginian army brought something back with them that they didn't expect. It was the plague. Spoiler alert, it was not a good time back on Punic territory. In 398 BC, taking advantage of Carthage's weak state due to the plague, Dionysius violated the peace treaty by massacring Carthaginian traders who had came to Syracuse. Very, very rude. Indeed, particularly when you are in a peace treaty, it is considered poor manners to be executing traders, non-military people, laymen, the innocents in all of this. So of course this angered the Carthaginians quite a lot. Now after he did this, subsequently he besieged, seized, and razed the Carthaginian city of Motia in western Sicily, cleverly thwarting Himilco's relief efforts. Now back on the home front, Himilco, now elected as king, decisively retaliated the following year, claiming Motia and capturing Messina. He then besieged Syracuse itself after Mago, another kinsman, defeated the Greek fleet off Catana. The siege initially progressed favorably in 397, but that old plague had came back, and it decimated the Carthaginian forces running rampant through their camp in 396, leading to their collapse under Syracusan assault. Bad luck, Well, Himilco had negotiated safe passage for the Carthaginian citizens by paying an indemnity of 300 talents to Dionysius, abandoning his mercenaries and returning to Carthage. So, what happened when he returned to Carthage? Unfortunately, he was not welcomed with open arms. Upon returning to his home city, he was publicly shamed for the loss. Well, he couldn't really speak against that. Of course, the court of public opinion had already decided. There was only one thing to do. He assumed blame for the defeat, and then, sadly, took his own life. Rest in peace to Himilco. Better luck next time. Now, following his demise, the power of these so-called kings was significantly curtailed, with an authority shifting towards oligarchy, which governed through the Council of Elders and the newly established Tribunal of 104. Well, I'm sure you want to hear more about that plague, right? Because we love plagues on this channel. The plague brought back to Carthage from Sicily, of course, inflicted widespread devastation. Now, this was compounded by a severe rebellion in Africa that coincided with the outbreak. They were sort of getting hit from all sides. Carthage found itself besieged, relying heavily on its naval power to sustain the city. Following Himilco's death, he was succeeded by his relative Mago, who faced the daunting task of quelling the rebellion, while Dionysius consolidated his authority in Sicily. The next confrontation between Carthage and Dionysius occurred in 393. Mago, seeking to assist the besieged Sicels against Syracuse, suffered defeat at the hands of Dionysius again. Carthage reinforced Mago's efforts in 392, but before engaging Dionysius, the Sicels defected to the Greek side. While outmaneuvered by Dionysius, the Carthaginian army conceded to a peace treaty, allowing Carthage to maintain its hold on Sicily while granting Syracuse autonomy in dealing with the Sicels. This treaty endured for 9 years. Dionysius reignited hostilities in 383. Although the specifics of the initial 4 years of conflict remain rather unclear. In a significant departure, Carthage dispatched a force led by Mago to southern Italy in 379 to aid Italian Greeks against Syracuse. Now, despite achieving some success, Carthage faced simultaneous revolts in Libya and Sardinia, further exacerbated by another outbreak of plague in Africa. The stalemate in Sicily shifted again when Dionysius slew Mago in the Battle of Cabala in 378. Carthage at this point was a little sick of losing. It was not going well for them at all. They decided to initiate peace negotiations. After these negotiations went back and forth and dragged on for an entire year, they ultimately collapsed. Now Dionysius felt like he was on quite a roll, so he decided to capitalize on his gains, launching a full-on assault on Punic Sicily. However, he suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of Cronium in 376, led by Himilco, Mago's son. You can't win them all, Dionysius. Well, despite this victory, Carthage opted not to pursue further military action, instead accepting an indemnity payment of 1,000 talents and the restoration of Carthaginian territories in Sicily. The manner and timing of Carthage's suppression of the African and Sardinian rebellions still remain a little mysterious. Dionysius reignited hostilities in 368, launching attacks that initially saw successes as he laid siege to Lilybom. However, the turning point came with the defeat of his ships at Drepanum, leading to a stalemate. The war ultimately concluded with Dionysius's death in 367. Despite his efforts, Carthaginian territories west of the Hilkias River remained fully under their control. Hanno, a prominent aristocrat, rose to command in Sicily, where he and his family wielded significant political influence in Carthage for about half a century. During this time, Carthage forged alliances with the Etruscans, while Tarentum and Syracuse also struck similar treaties. A power struggle began to ensue, resulting in Hanno's eventual deposition of his rival Suniatus, the leader of the Council of Elders, through legal means, followed by his execution. a little unfair. They could have just exiled him, don't you think? With Sicily firmly under Carthaginian control, Hanno spearheaded campaigns into Libya, Spain, and Mauritania, earning him the epithet Magnus, and amassing considerable wealth. Because why not, huh? His sons Hamilcar and Gisco distinguished themselves in these military endeavors. However, Hanno's ambitions for absolute power led him to plot the overthrow of the Council of Elders. This was a scheme that ultimately failed. And when they found out who it was, well, Hanno, Hamilcar, and much of their family were executed, while Gisco, he just faced exile. But as we know, exile, being forced to walk outside of the city grounds away from those safe walls and markets you could buy food at, all the rest, well, for a city slicker, that pretty much meant death. In 348, Carthage and Rome, now a significant power in central Italy, negotiated a second treaty. Under its terms, Romans were permitted to trade in Sicily, but were prohibited from settling there. Additionally, exploration, trade, and settlement activities in Iberia, Sardinia, and Libya were forbidden to the Romans, who were required to surrender any captured settlements in these regions to Carthage. The Carthaginians then pledged amicable relations with the Latins, agreed to return cities captured in Latium to Rome, and were prohibited from encamping in Roman territory with arms overnight. This treaty underscores the Carthaginian sphere of influence over the Phoenician colonies in Iberia by 348. Now what about Dionysius? What was he doing? Well, he was in the cold ground at this point. Following the death of Dionysius, a power struggle ensued among Dion, Dionysius II of Syracuse, and other contenders. Despite Syracuse's diminishing hegemony over Sicilian cities, due to internal strife escalating into open conflict, Carthage remained relatively passive from 366 to 346. But they couldn't remain passive forever. You get a little bored, don't you? In 343 BC, Carthage decided to oppose Timoleon. Now, despite numerical superiority, support from allied Greeks, and even his admission into Syracuse, Mago, the Carthaginian commander, mishandled the situation to such an extent that he chose to take his own life rather than face the tribunal of 104 upon his return to Carthage. Timoleon garnered support from tyrants allied with Carthage, and the retaliatory Punic expedition dispatched to Sicily in response to Syracusan raids was decisively defeated in the Battle of Crimisus in 341 by a combined Greek force. Gisco, son of Hanno Magnus, was recalled and appointed as king, but his efforts yielded not much. As Timoleon captured several pro-Carthaginian Greek cities, a peace treaty was brokered in 338. Now this agreement left Carthaginian holdings in Sicily unchanged, allowing Syracuse to manage its affairs with other Sicilian cities completely independently. Meanwhile, as Carthage grappled with the affairs in Sicily, the ascendance of Macedon under Philip II and Alexander the Great resulted in the defeat of Greek city-states and, very notably, the downfall of the Achaemenid Empire. And this was a big deal, because the Achaemenid Empire was perhaps the largest empire the world had ever seen. It was huge. All mainland Phoenician cities except Tyre simply submitted to Alexander, who besieged and plundered Tyre anyway in 332 BC. This is what happens when you do not submit to Alexander. Though, interestingly, he made sure that Carthaginian citizens within that city of Tyre were spared. He just let them go. Everybody else, however, well, they were in the same place as Dionysius. Carthage dispatched 2 delegations to Alexander, one in 332 and another in 323. But these efforts yielded quite limited results. Well, Carthage were probably looking at what was going on at that time. Alexander absolutely blitzkrieging the known world, and thought, well, he's either going to go east or he's going to come west. Fortunately for him, and for the Carthaginians, he went east. Alexander had a saying, all glory is won in the east. At least that's accredited to him. So fortunately for Carthage, Alexander's plans to invade Carthage, Italy, and Iberia were interrupted because he died while preparing a fleet in Cilicia. It wasn't enough that he'd already conquered most of Egypt and the remnants of the Achaemenid Empire, Asia Minor, Greece. Well, he wanted the world. Died quite young, too. Well, subsequently, conflicts among the Diadochi and a 3-way power struggle among the Antagonid, Macedon, Ptolemaic Egypt, and Seleucid Syria spared Carthage from further clashes with the successor states for a period, as they were too busy fighting amongst each other to really even take notice of what Carthage was doing. Trade relations were established with the new Egypt, which was now under the Ptolemaic dynasty, providing Carthage with maritime access to eastern markets that had been severed since 480. In 315, Agathocles, the tyrant of Syracuse, seized the city of Messene, modern-day Messina. Subsequently, in 311 BC, he violated the terms of the existing peace treaty by launching an invasion of Carthaginian territories in Sicily and laying siege to Acragas. In response to all this, Hamilcar, the grandson of Hanno Magnus, led the Carthaginian forces and achieved a significant success. By 310, Carthage controlled nearly all of Sicily and had besieged Syracuse itself. In a desperate move, Agathocles embarked on a secret expedition to the mainland with 14,000 men, aiming to reverse his fortunes by laying a counter-strike against Carthage. This expedition devastated Carthaginian territories in Africa. Troops withdrawn from Sicily under the joint command of Hanno and Bomilcar, rivals in Carthaginian politics, were unfortunately defeated by Agathocles, with Hanno unfortunately falling in battle. Rest in peace, Hanno. Another one bites the dust for the Carthaginians. Ophellas arrived from Cyrene with 10,000 troops to aid the Syracusans, but Agathocles later murdered Ophellas and assumed control of his entire army. Despite capturing Utica, Carthage staunchly resisted, and Syracuse remained under intense blockade. In Sicily, Hamilcar's nocturnal assault on Syracuse failed, resulting in his capture and subsequent executions by the Syracusans. Another one gone. Agathocles returned to Syracuse in 308, defeating the Punic army and lifting the blockade, before turning his attention back to Africa. By 307, the conflict concluded with Carthage emerging victorious over the Greeks in Africa, surviving a coup attempt by Bomilcar in the process. Agathocles abandoned his army and returned to Syracuse, where a treaty was brokered dividing Sicily between Carthaginian and Greek territories. Between 280 and 275, Pyrrhus of Epirus embarked on two significant campaigns aimed at safeguarding and expanding the influence of the Molossians in the western Mediterranean. The first campaign was against the rising power of the Roman Republic in southern Italy, while the second targeted Carthage in Sicily. A Greek city, Tarentum, had initiated hostilities by sacking Thurii and driving out the Roman garrison in 282. Seeking military support, Tarentum turned to Pyrrhus, who responded by defeating the Romans in the battles of Heraclea and Asculum. Amidst Pyrrhus's engagements in Italy, he received requests for aid from Sicilian cities such as Agrigentum, Syracuse, and Leontini. Seeking assistance in expelling Carthaginian dominance from the island once and for all. Carthage had besieged Syracuse after capturing Acragas, with Mago leading a blockade of 100 ships. Pyrrhus agreed to intervene and sailed for Sicily, where he bolstered the Sicilian cities with an army of infantry, cavalry, war elephants, supported by a fleet of around 200 ships. Now initially, Pyrrhus achieved success in his Sicilian campaign against Carthage, pushing back their forces and capturing the fortress of Erise, though he failed to take Lilybom. After a 2-month siege, Pyrrhus eventually withdrew. Now, despite Carthage seeking peace, Pyrrhus demanded the complete renunciation of their claims in Sicily, indicating his intention to conquer Carthage itself. However, this ruthless action in Sicily, including the execution of 2 Sicilian rulers accused of plotting against him, fueled a lot of animosity towards the Greeks. It's rather poor form to just randomly execute people who you think may be plotting against you, and it seems that Pyrrhus was quite fond of taking such a direct approach. Well, facing setbacks, Pyrrhus decided to abandon his plans for Carthage, at least for now, and redirected his focus to events in southern Italy. Carthage's victory over Pyrrhus's fleet further solidified the return to the status quo, while Rome's successful defense against Pyrrhus solidified its dominion of Italy, setting the stage for future conflicts with Carthage in the Punic Wars. And that is an entirely different video. And if you want to know about that, if you indeed desire to understand the Punic Wars, then I direct you to the link in the description, where you will find my own video all about the Punic Wars. Part 3 of our exploration. Well, thank you very much. It's been great once again to have you here with me. If you've liked the content, consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video, and if you're feeling extra spicy, you may leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If not just for the algorithm itself, it certainly enjoys it, and I always reply. I am the ASMR historian. It's been a pleasure. Good night, everyone. See you next time. The Punic Wars were a sequence of conflicts spanning from 264 to 146 BC, pitting Rome against Carthage. These wars encompassed 3 major engagements across the western Mediterranean, comprising extensive land and naval battles over a period of 43 years. Additionally, the uprising against Carthage, lasting 4 years starting in 241, is often regarded as part of the broader context of the wars. These conflicts resulted in significant casualties and material losses for both Rome and Carthage. So how did it all begin? Well, let's go right back to the start, to the prelude to the conflicts. The Roman Republic had been aggressively expanding its territory in southern Italy for around a century before the outbreak of the First Punic War. By 270 BC, Rome had conquered the southern Italian peninsula up to the Arno River, following its victory in the Pyrrhic War against the Greek cities of Magna Graecia. Meanwhile, Carthage, centered in present-day Tunisia, had established firm dominance over southern Iberia, coastal North Africa, the Balearic Islands, Corsica, Sardinia, and the western part of Sicily, exerting maritime control over all of these regions. Starting from 480 BC, Carthage engaged in a series of inconclusive conflicts against the Greek city-states of Sicily, particularly Syracuse. By 264, Carthage had emerged as the dominant power on the island. While both Carthage and Rome were the leading forces in the western Mediterranean, despite occasional tensions, the two states had maintained more or less friendly relations with each other, formalizing their alliances in 509 BC, 348, and around 279. They also fostered strong commercial ties, being the two largest powers in the area. During the Pyrrhic War of 280 to 275, Carthage had provided support to Rome against King Pyrrhus of Epirus, who challenged Rome in Italy and Carthage in Sicily. However, Rome's expansionist policies in southern Italy clashed with Carthage's proprietary interests in the region. This conflicting approach to territorial control led to tensions between the two powers, and ultimately led to war in 264 BC. The immediate trigger for this conflict was the dispute over control of the independent Sicilian city-state of Messana, known in our modern day as Messina. In 264, hostilities erupted between Carthage and Rome, marking the beginning of the First Punic War. So just to quickly recap, it was more of a dispute about territories and the control of the city-state Messana. An agreement could not be struck between the two powers, thus providing a pretext to the conflict. So first, let's understand how the armies were composed. In the Roman army, most male citizens were obligated to serve as infantry, with a minority contributing to the cavalry component. Typically, Roman legions comprised around 4,200 infantry and 300 cavalry. A portion of the infantry served as javelin-armed skirmishers called velites, while the remainder formed heavy infantry, equipped with body armor, shields, and short swords. Legionaries were organized into 3 ranks, with the front rank also carrying javelins. Usually they would throw their javelin first, then meet a frontal assault with their short swords. The Roman military hierarchy included consuls, who led armies during wartime, and allied legions often supplemented Roman forces with additional cavalry. In contrast, Carthaginian citizens served in the army only in times of direct threat to Carthage itself. Carthaginian armies relied heavily on foreign recruits, including close-order infantry, javelin-armed skirmishers, shock cavalry, and light cavalry from North Africa, Iberia, and Gaul. Of course, we couldn't go past Carthage without mentioning that war elephants were also employed, sourced from indigenous African forests. Garrison duty and land blockades were common operations, and surprise attacks and ambushes were frequently employed during campaigns. Formal battles were preceded by days or weeks of camping, with infantry typically positioned in the center and cavalry on the flanks. Many battles were decided by attacks on the flanks or rear, leading to partial or complete envelopment of one side's forces. Now for the naval structure. Quinquiremes, named for their 5-oarsman configuration, were the backbone of both Roman and Carthaginian naval forces throughout the Punic Wars. This type of vessel was so prevalent that Polybius often referred to it as a generic term for warship. Each quinquireme boasted a crew of 300 individuals, including 280 oarsmen, 20 deck crew and officers. Additionally, it typically carried around 40 marines, although this number could swell to as many as 120 if there were an imminent battle. In 260 BC, the Romans embarked on constructing their fleet. Now, at the time, they weren't entirely sure how to construct a good warship, but they got rather lucky. Well, they were down at the coast one day, and they discovered a shipwrecked Carthaginian quinquireme. So they used that as a model. Now, however, due to their lack of shipbuilding experience, well, the creation of vessels were heavier than those of Carthage, and this of course resulted in slower and less maneuverable ships. Not a good problem to have. Achieving coordination among the oarsmen for unified rowing and complex battle maneuvers demanded extensive and vigorous training. At least half of the oarsmen needed prior experience for effective ship handling. Consequently, the Romans faced initial disadvantages against the more seasoned Carthaginians. To address this, they introduced the corvus, a 1.2 meter wide and 11 meter long bridge with a heavy spike underneath. This innovation enabled Roman legionaries serving as marines to board enemy ships and capture them, diverging from the conventional tactic of simply ramming into the ship and hopefully breaking it in half. Speaking of rams, during the Punic Wars, all warships were outfitted with them, featuring a triple set of 60-centimeter wide bronze blades, which weighed up to 270 kilograms, strategically positioned at the waterline. In the century preceding these wars, boarding tactics had become prevalent, while ramming had somewhat declined. This shift had occurred as larger and heavier vessels, prevalent during this period, lacked the necessary speed and maneuverability to make ramming an effective option. Additionally, their sturdier construction reduced the impact of a ram attack, even if it managed to be successful. The Roman innovation of the corvus continued this trend, compensating for their initial deficiency in ship maneuvering skills. However, the corvus' additional weight in the prow compromised both the ship's maneuverability and its seaworthiness. Moreover, in rough sea conditions, the corvus became impractical, leading the Romans to discontinue its use midway through the First Punic War. So, onto the war itself. Much of the First Punic War unfolded on, or at least near, the waters of Sicily. The island's hilly and rugged terrain made maneuvering large forces somewhat challenging, favoring defensive strategies. Land operations primarily involved raids, sieges, and interdiction, with only 2 full-scale pitched battles occurring during the 23-year conflict on Sicily. The war commenced with the Romans establishing a foothold at Messana in 264. They coerced Syracuse, the island's major independent power, into an alliance and besieged Carthage's primary base at Acragas on the south coast. In 262 BC, a Carthaginian force attempted to lift the siege but suffered a significant defeat at the Battle of Acragas. Subsequently, the Romans quickly captured the city, selling a large portion of its population into slavery. I'm sure they were thrilled about that. Following this victory, the land war on Sicily reached a stalemate as the Carthaginians concentrated on defending their fortified towns and cities along the coast. This defensive posture allowed them to be supplied and reinforced without significant interference from the Romans. Consequently, the focus shifted to naval warfare, an area where the Romans at this time lacked experience. However, they rapidly built a navy to challenge Carthage's maritime dominance. Utilizing innovations like the aforementioned corvus, the Romans secured a significant victory at the Battle of Mylae in 260. Subsequent engagements included the seizure of a Carthaginian base in Corsica, although an attempted assault on Sardinia was repelled. Exploiting these naval victories, the Romans launched an invasion on North Africa in 256, intercepted by the Carthaginians at the Battle of Cape Ecnomus off Sicily's southern coast. Despite the Carthaginians' superior seamanship, the Romans gained an advantage with the corvus, turning the battle into a chaotic melee. Of course, the Carthaginians were thinking at this time, well, if we can just fight them on the sea, we'll mop the floor with them. Well, they didn't think they would be standing on the decks of their very ships fighting the Romans, sword to sword, shield to shield. Did not work out as planned. The Carthaginians suffered another defeat, possibly the largest naval battle in history in terms of combatants involved. Following this, the Carthaginians initially sought peace in 255, but after the terms were way too one-sided, they decided they had no choice but continue to resist. However, the Battle of Tunis in the spring of 255, a combined Carthaginian force under Xanthippus, a Spartan mercenary, managed to crush the Romans. The Romans, attempting to evacuate their survivors, faced further defeat at the Battle of Cape Hermaeum, as their fleet was heavily routed. Moreover, a storm devastated the return Roman fleet to Italy, resulting in significant losses, possibly exacerbated by the unseaworthy nature of their ships due to putting all of their effort into the corvus rather than the ships themselves. Now, despite all of these setbacks, neither side could really secure a decisive advantage. Therefore, the war persisted, marked by numerous battles and sieges, including the recapture and subsequent destruction of Acragas by the Carthaginians in 255. However, the Romans rapidly rebuilt their fleet and captured Panormus, modern-day Palermo, in 254. Over the following years, both sides engaged in skirmishes and strategic maneuvers across Sicily, with the Romans gradually gaining control of the island. In 250 BC, the Romans confronted the Carthaginians at Panormus, effectively countering their use of war elephants and achieving victory. As the Romans continued to advance, they besieged Lilybaeum and Drepana, the last Carthaginian strongholds remaining in Sicily. Despite facing intense resistance, including a defeat at the Battle of Drepana, the Romans persisted in their siege of Lilybaeum for 9 years. The turning point had to eventually come, and it did, in 243, when the Romans, financially strained yet very determined, rebuilt their fleet and blockaded Carthaginian garrisons. Carthage attempted to relieve their troops, but suffered a decisive defeat at the Battle of the Agates Islands in 241. This victory was the final straw, and it forced Carthage to negotiate for peace, somewhat reluctantly, resulting in the Treaty of Lutatius. Carthage was forced to pay reparations, and Sicily was annexed, becoming a Roman province. Well, of course, this was the final nail in the coffin for the First Punic War. Polybius described it as one of the longest, most fiercely contested wars in history, cementing Rome's dominance in the western Mediterranean and laying the foundation for its maritime power for centuries to come. But, of course, war never changes, and it never ends. The Mercenary or Truceless War erupted a few years later in 241 over a dispute regarding the payment of wages owed to 20,000 foreign soldiers who had fought for Carthage during the First Punic Wars. It seems that Carthage had neglected to pay its bills. Led by Spendius and Matho, the mutiny escalated into a full-scale rebellion, attracting 70,000 Africans from Carthage's dependent territories, who provided support and resources. Well, initially, Carthage struggled in the face of the rebellion, particularly under the leadership of General Hanno. Well, it couldn't all be bad luck for the Carthaginians. Things had to turn around, right? Well, they did, with Hamilcar Barca, the father of a very famous character in this story, which we'll get to somewhat later. In 240 BC, he was a seasoned veteran of the Sicilian campaigns, and he assumed joint command of the Carthaginian army and later supreme command in 239. Well, his first job, and indeed a tall order, was crushing this rebellion. Employing a combination of military strategy and leniency, Hamilcar attempted to quell the rebellion. However, after Spendius brutally tortured 700 Carthaginian prisoners to death, the conflict intensified with unprecedented ferocity. That whole strategy of leniency, well, they weren't doing that anymore. Despite initial setbacks, by early 237, Carthage had regained control over the rebel-held cities. An expedition was organized to retake Sardinia, where mutinous soldiers had massacred all of the Carthaginians. However, the Roman Senate viewed this as an act of aggression and demanded Carthage cede Sardinia and Corsica, along with paying a hefty fine, of course. Weakened by 3 decades of war, Carthage reluctantly agreed to avoid further conflict with Rome. This episode, characterized by Roman opportunism and disregard for existing treaties, of course sowed deep resentment in Carthage. The breach of the treaty signed just years earlier became a significant grievance, ultimately leading to renewed hostilities in 218, with the outbreak of the Second Punic War. It seems very obvious that Rome's actions were somewhat unjust, and the key factor in this resurgence of conflict with Carthage. You must feel sorry for them a little bit. Well, after quelling the rebellion, Hamilcar Barca recognized the urgent need for Carthage to bolster its economic and military capabilities in preparation for future conflicts with Rome. He knew that it was coming. Following the First Punic War, Carthaginian territories in Iberia were limited to a few prosperous coastal cities in the south. In 237, Hamilcar led the Carthaginian army to Iberia, where he established a quasi-monarchical, autonomous state in the southeast of the region. This move provided Carthage with access to valuable silver mines, agricultural resources, manpower, military infrastructure such as shipyards, and territorial depth, positioning it to confront Rome with a much greater confidence. Hamilcar governed this new territory as viceroy until his death, after which his son-in-law Hasdrubal assumed leadership in the early 220s, followed by his son Hannibal in 221, and I'm sure you've heard of him. In 226, the Ebro Treaty was negotiated with Rome, delineating the Ebro River as the northern boundary of Carthaginian influence. However, it wasn't all fun and games. Tensions escalated when Rome entered into a separate agreement with the city of Saguntum, located south of the Ebro River, sometime within the following 6 years. This move by Rome undermined the terms of the Ebro Treaty, and contributed to the escalating conflict between Carthage and Rome, which ultimately culminated in the outbreak of the Second Punic War. In 219, Hannibal led a Carthaginian army to besiege, capture, and sack the city of Saguntum, an act that directly violated the terms of the already broken Ebro Treaty and prompted Rome to declare war on Carthage in the spring of 218. This declaration marked the beginning of the Second Punic War in official status. The war unfolded across three primary theaters. The first being Italy, which saw Hannibal's audacious campaign, during which he repeatedly defeated the Roman legions in a series of battles, showcasing his tactical genius and strategic acumen, and also giving the Romans nightmares for some generations after. While Hannibal's main focus was on Italy, there was also occasional subsidiary campaigns in regions such as Sicily, Sardinia, and Greece. In Iberia, modern-day Spain, Hannibal's younger brother Hasdrubal defended Carthaginian colonial cities against Roman incursions. Hasdrubal's efforts met with mixed success until he eventually decided to move his forces into Italy to reinforce Hannibal. The decisive phase of the war took place in Africa, where Rome sought to confront Carthage directly. It was in this theater that the fate of the conflict would ultimately be decided. These three theaters formed the backdrop for a protracted and brutal struggle between Rome and Carthage, each vying for supremacy in the Mediterranean world. 218 BC. Hannibal crosses the Alps. Well, in 218 BC, several significant events unfolded across different regions, setting the stage for an escalating conflict. Naval skirmishes occurred around Sicily, with the Romans successfully repelling a Carthaginian attack and seizing control of the island of Malta. Meanwhile, major Gallic tribes launched attacks on Roman colonies in Cisalpine Gaul, prompting Roman settlers to seek refuge in the established colony of Mutina, modern-day Modena. The settlers were besieged there, leading to a Roman relief force breaking through the siege, but subsequently getting ambushed and besieged themselves. The Roman army, designated for a campaign in Iberia, had one Roman and one allied legion detached from it to deal with the situation in northern Italy. The delay in raising fresh troops for this campaign postponed the army's departure until September. Meanwhile, Hannibal assembled a Carthaginian army in New Carthage, modern-day Cartagena, in Iberia, and embarked on a daring march northward along the coast. He crossed the Rhone River and defeated local Gauls who attempted to obstruct his path. They did not get very far. Despite Roman efforts to intercept him, Hannibal managed to evade them and continued his advance into Gaul. By late autumn, Hannibal's forces reached the Alps, where they encountered harsh weather, treacherous terrain, and more resistance from native tribes. Now, despite these challenges, Hannibal successfully crossed the Alps in only 15 days, arriving in northern Italy with a formidable army that included infantry, cavalry, and a comparatively small number of surviving elephants from his previous Iberian campaign. It is indeed hard to get elephants across the snowy mountains. Hannibal's unexpected arrival in northern Italy caught the Romans quite off guard and forced them to abandon their planned invasion of Africa for the year, redirecting their focus to confronting the Carthaginian threat that was now on their very doorstep. In the late November of 218, the Carthaginian cavalry routed the Roman cavalry and light infantry at the Battle of Ticinus, following which most of the Gallic tribes declared support for Hannibal's cause. I think they probably wanted to be on the winning side. This, of course, bolstered Hannibal's army to a formidable force of 37,000 men. Subsequently, a large Roman army was drawn into battle by Hannibal at the Trebia, where it suffered a devastating defeat. Hannibal's victory led to a surge in Gauls joining his ranks. They just kept on coming. Perhaps even in these early days, the Romans had left quite a bitter taste in the mouth of the Gauls. To block Hannibal's advance into central Italy, the Romans stationed armies at strategic locations, including Arretium and the Adriatic coast. However, in early spring of 217, Hannibal managed to cross the Apennines unopposed and drew the Roman army under Gaius Flaminius into an ambush at Lake Trasimene. In this battle, he inflicted a severe blow to the Romans, killing thousands, capturing many more, including the consul himself, Gaius Flaminius. Well, there was quite an uproar in the Senate about this. How dare they defeat us? We're meant to be the ones who win the battles. So following these defeats, the Romans decided to appoint Quintus Fabius as a dictator, entrusting him with the war effort. Fabius adopted a cautious strategy, known as the Fabian strategy, which involved avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal's forces and instead engaging in small-scale skirmishes. Despite criticism from some quarters, Fabius persisted with this approach, aiming to wear down Hannibal's forces over time. In the subsequent elections of 216, Gaius Varro and Lucius Paulus, more aggressive-minded leaders, were elected as the new consuls. The Roman Senate authorized the raising of a massive army of 86,000 men, the largest in Roman history up to that point, certainly dealing with a national crisis. Paulus and Varro marched southward to confront Hannibal, leading to the fateful encounter at Cannae. And fateful indeed it was, but not for the Carthaginians. At the Battle of Cannae, despite initially breaking through Hannibal's center, the Roman legions found themselves surrounded as Hannibal's forces executed a brilliant maneuver. The Carthaginian cavalry, led by Hasdrubal, sealed the Roman fate by attacking their flanks and rear. They were completely surrounded, and they were all killed. They suffered catastrophic losses, and those who weren't killed were captured. All in all, it's estimated to be about 67,000. Very difficult to come back from that. Cannae marked a significant turning point in the war, widely regarded as Rome's greatest military disaster. And it left the city of Rome itself very vulnerable, with subsequent defeats further weakening its position. People were starting to get a little nervous. Fabius, recognized for his cautious strategy, was re-elected consul in the following years as Rome struggled to recover from the devastating losses suffered at Cannae and other battles. After the Battle of Cannae, Polybius's account of Hannibal's army in Italy becomes sparse, and Livy emerges as the primary surviving source for this phase of the war. Southern Italy witnessed a series of alliances and betrayals, with several city-states siding with Hannibal or falling to pro-Carthaginian factions. Notable among these were Capua and Tarentum, along with two major Samnite tribes. By 214, much of southern Italy had turned against Rome, although some exceptions did exist, and central Italy's majority remained loyal. The formidable fortifications of most cities made direct assaults impractical, and blockade, particularly of port cities, often proved futile. Carthage's new allies lacked a strong sense of unity with Carthage or each other, adding to Hannibal's challenges in defending various fronts. In 215, the port city of Locre's defection to Carthage provided a significant boost to Hannibal's forces, marking the only instance during the war that Carthage reinforced him directly. Another intended reinforcement under Hannibal's brother Mago was diverted to Iberia following Carthaginian setbacks there. Meanwhile, Rome resorted to drastic measures to bolster its legions, including enlisting slaves, criminals, and individuals not meeting the usual property qualifications. By 213, Rome had fielded over 22 legions, totaling over 100,000 men, supplemented by allied troops. Although unable to engage Hannibal in open battle with such forces, Rome's numbers forced him to concentrate his troops, limiting his movements. Over the next 12 years, post-Cannae, the war in southern Italy oscillated as cities shifted allegiances or fell to subterfuge, with the Romans retaking them through sieges or by manipulating the pro-Roman factions within. Despite Hannibal's repeated victories, Roman threats and successes in various regions gradually confined him to the extreme south by 207, leading to the return of several cities and territories to Roman control. In 216, Macedonian King Philip V pledged his support to Hannibal, triggering the First Macedonian War against Rome in the following year. Rome countered this threat by allying with the Aetolian League, a coalition of Greek city-states already at odds with Macedonia. By 205, however, this conflict was resolved through a negotiated peace. A rebellion in favor of Carthage erupted on Sardinia in 213 BC, but was swiftly quelled by the Roman garrison within. Until 215, Sicily remained firmly under Roman control, impeding Hannibal's access to sea reinforcement and resupply from Carthage. However, Hiero II, Syracuse's long-standing tyrant and a staunch Roman ally, died that year. His successor, Hieronymus, discontented with his position, brokered a treaty with Hannibal, defecting Syracuse to Carthage in exchange for control over all of Sicily. Roman forces led by Claudius Marcellus besieged Syracuse in the spring of 213. This siege was notable for Archimedes' ingenious war machines countering traditional Roman siege attacks. Bit of a Revenge of the Nerds scenario going on in Syracuse. In 213 BC, a significant Carthaginian force led by Himilco was dispatched to relieve Syracuse. It captured several Roman garrison towns on Sicily, expelling or massacring many Roman garrisons. However, in spring 212 BC, the Romans launched a surprise night assault on Syracuse, capturing several city districts. Plagued by disease, the Carthaginian army failed to resupply Syracuse, leading to its fall that autumn, with Archimedes, unfortunately, killed during the conflict. Carthage sent additional reinforcements to Sicily in 211, mounting an offensive. In response, a fresh Roman army attacked Agrigentum, the main Carthaginian stronghold on the island, in 210. The city was betrayed to the Romans by a dissatisfied Carthaginian officer. Subsequently, remaining Carthaginian-held towns either surrendered or fell through force or betrayal, securing Sicily's grain supply to Rome and its armies. In the spring of 207, Hasdrubal Barca mirrored his brother's feat by leading an army of over 35,000 men across the Alps into Italy with the intention of joining forces with Hannibal. However, Hannibal was unaware of his brother's presence. The Romans facing Hannibal deceived him into believing that their entire army remained in camp, while a significant portion marched north under the consul Claudius Nero to reinforce the Romans facing Hasdrubal, commanded by the other consul, Marcus Salinator. The combined Roman force engaged Hasdrubal at the Battle of Metaurus and decisively defeated him, resulting in the death of Hasdrubal. This battle solidified Roman dominance in Italy and marked the end of their Fabian strategy. In 205, Mago landed in Genoa, in northwest Italy, with the remnants of his Iberian army, reinforced by Gallic and Ligurian allies. Hannibal's inconclusive Battle of Crotona in 204, in the far south of the peninsula, coincided with Mago's arrival. Mago then led his reinforced armies towards the lands of Carthage's primary Gallic allies in the Po Valley, but was halted by a large Roman army and defeated at the Battle of Insubria in 203. Publius Cornelius Scipio invaded the Carthaginian homeland in 204, winning 2 major battles and gaining the allegiance of the Numidian kingdoms of North Africa. In response, Hannibal and the remnants of his army were recalled from Italy. They sailed from Croton and landed at Carthage with 15,000 to 20,000 experienced veterans. Mago was also recalled, although he died of wounds during the voyage. In the end, 12,000 of his troops reached Carthage. In Iberia, the Roman fleet disembarked its army in the northeast in 218 BC, gaining support among the local tribes. A Carthaginian attack in late 218 was repelled at the Battle of Caesar. Subsequent engagements, including the Battle of the Ebro River in 217, saw Roman victories that hindered Carthaginian reinforcement efforts from Iberia to Italy. Hasdrubal, Hannibal's brother and the Carthaginian commander in Iberia, suffered defeat at Dertosa in 215. The Romans capitalized on defections of local Celtiberian tribes over to their side. They captured Saguntum in 212 and hired 20,000 Celtiberian mercenaries in 211. Later on, in 209, Publius Cornelius Scipio captured Carthago Nova, the center of Carthaginian power in Iberia, liberating hostages and securing a vast treasure, despite subsequent resistance from some liberated tribes. In the spring of the following year, 208, Hasdrubal moved to confront Scipio at the Battle of Baicola. Although the Carthaginians were defeated, Hasdrubal managed to withdraw the majority of his army, preventing any Roman pursuit, with most losses among his Iberian allies. Hasdrubal then led his depleted army through the western passes of the Pyrenees into Gaul. In 207, after recruiting heavily in Gaul, Hasdrubal attempted to cross the Alps into Italy to join his brother, but was defeated before he could do. At the Battle of Ilipa in 206, Scipio, commanding 48,000 men, half Italian, half Iberian, defeated a Carthaginian army of 54,000 men and 32 elephants, sealing the Carthaginian fate in Iberia. Gades, the last Carthaginian city held in Iberia, defected to the Romans. Later that year, a mutiny erupted among Roman troops, with support from some Iberian leaders disappointed that Roman forces remained in the peninsula. However, Scipio effectively quelled the mutiny. In 205, Mago attempted to recapture New Carthage amid another mutiny and an Iberian uprising, but he was repulsed, prompting him to leave Iberia for Cisalpine Gaul with his remaining forces. Carthage managed to recruit at least 4,000 mercenaries from Iberia in 203, despite nominal Roman control. In North Africa, Syphax, a powerful Numidian king, initially declared for Rome in 213 BC, prompting Carthage to send advisors to train his soldiers. However, in 206, Carthage ended this drain on its resources by dividing several Numidian kingdoms with Syphax. Massinissa, a disinherited Numidian prince, returned to Rome for support. Publius Scipio, commanding legions in Sicily, embarked on a plan to end the war with an invasion of Africa in 204. After landing in Africa, Scipio defeated two large Carthaginian armies and, with the help of Massinissa, captured Syphax. Hannibal was then recalled from Italy, and a decisive battle ensued at Zama in October of 202. The resulting peace treaty, dictated by Rome, stripped Carthage of its overseas territories, imposed an indemnity, and restricted its military capabilities, establishing Rome's political dominance over Carthage. Scipio was celebrated with a triumph and bestowed the agnomen Africanus. The war's pressures led to the Romans developing an effective logistical system, setting the stage for future overseas conquests. Well, what happened after the war? Well, after the war, Massinissa emerged as the dominant ruler among the Numidians, leveraging Carthage's weakened state to expand his influence. Over the next 48 years, he repeatedly capitalized on Carthage's inability to protect its own territories. Despite Carthage's pleas to Rome for assistance, or at least permission to take military action, Rome consistently supported Massinissa, denying Carthage any recourse. Massinissa's raids into Carthaginian territory therefore became bolder and a lot more frequent, effectively having a green light from the Romans. In 151, Carthage, in defiance of the treaty, mustered an army and launched a counterattack against the Numidians. However, the campaign ended disastrously for Carthage, culminating in the surrender of its army. And although Carthage had managed to pay off its indemnity and was experiencing economic prosperity, it posed no military threat to Rome. Nevertheless, certain factions within the Roman Senate harbored long-standing ambitions to obliterate Carthage for good. The breach of the treaty served as a pretext for these elements, and in 149, once again, war was declared against Carthage. A Roman army of around 50,000 soldiers, under the joint command of both consuls, landed near Utica, situated about 35 kilometers north of Carthage. Rome issued an ultimatum, demanding that Carthage surrender all of its weapons and military equipment to avoid war. Carthage complied, delivering vast quantities of armament, including 200,000 sets of armor, 2,000 catapults, and numerous warships. Well, the Romans thought that wasn't quite good enough. Then they insisted that Carthage destroy its own city and relocate at least 16 kilometers inland from the coast. Well, in response to this, the Carthaginians were a little bit upset. They then terminated the negotiations and began rebuilding their arsenal. In addition to defending the walls of Carthage, the Carthaginians organized a field army under Hasdrubal the Boetharch, stationed approximately 25 kilometers, 16 miles to the south. The Roman army attempted to besiege Carthage, but the city's formidable walls and determined citizen militia thwarted their efforts. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians launched effective counterattacks, raiding Roman supply lines. In 148, Carthaginian fire ships destroyed numerous Roman vessels, causing significant setbacks for the besiegers. Compounding their difficulties, the main Roman camp was situated in a swamp, leading to outbreaks of disease during the summer. Consequently, the Romans relocated their camp and ships farther away, transitioning from a close siege to a more distant blockade. As the war persisted into 147, Scipio Aemilianus, an adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, who had demonstrated exceptional leadership, was elected to consul and assumed command. Despite vigorous Carthaginian resistance, including the construction of warships and naval engagements, the Romans intensified their efforts. In an assault on the walls, the Romans breached the city, but subsequently withdrew. Hasdrubal, getting a little desperate at this point and seeking to bolster the Carthaginian resolve, gruesomely executed Roman prisoners on the walls, eliminating any possibility of negotiation. In response to dissent with the city council, Hasdrubal ruthlessly silenced opposition and seized control completely. Scipio then implemented a close blockade and constructed a mole to cut off sea access. In the spring of 146 BC, the Roman army secured a foothold near the harbor fortifications. Scipio orchestrated a decisive assault, swiftly capturing the city's main square and systematically advancing through the residential area. After 6 days of intense fighting, during which the Romans encountered fierce resistance, they finally subdued the city. The last defenders, including Roman deserters fighting for Carthage, took refuge in the temple of Eshmon and perished in the flames. The Roman victory resulted in the enslavement of 50,000 Carthaginian prisoners, marking not only the end of the war, but the end of Carthage. Despite the popular belief, there is not much historical evidence to support the notions that the Romans salted the city's fields. This myth was debunked some years ago by scholars. The remaining Carthaginian territories were absorbed into the Roman Republic and reorganized to form the Roman province of Africa, with Utica established as its capital. This new province played a crucial role as a significant source of grain and other agricultural products for the expanding Roman Empire. Many prominent Punic cities, including those in Mauritania, came under direct Roman control, although they were allowed to maintain their traditional Punic administrative structures. About a century later, Julius Caesar oversaw the rebuilding of Carthage, but this time as a Roman city. Over time, Carthage flourished and grew into one of the principal urban centers of Roman Africa during the heyday of the Roman Empire. Today, Rome remains the capital city of Italy, while the ruins of Carthage can be found approximately 24 kilometers east of Tunis, the capital of Tunisia, along the North African coastline. Well, we've reached the end of our video on the Punic Wars. Thank you very much for joining me. What an adventure. Hannibal Barca, born 247 BC in present-day northern Tunisia, was one of the sons of Carthaginian leader Hamilcar Barca. Raised in the aftermath of Carthage's defeat in the First Punic War, Hannibal's family sought to improve their fortunes. Hamilcar, supported by Agades, initiated the subjugation of tribes in the Iberian Peninsula. Facing logistical challenges, Hamilcar marched his forces across Numidia to reach the Pillars of Hercules and cross the Strait of Gibraltar. As a child, Hannibal expressed a strong desire to accompany his father in overseas wars. According to Polybius, Hamilcar agreed, but he demanded a solemn oath from Hannibal never to be a friend of Rome. There are different accounts of this oath, with one version mentioning Hannibal being held over a sacrificial fire during the ceremony. Hannibal swore to use fire and steel to arrest the destiny of Rome. As soon as he reached the appropriate age, of course. We can't go having little 8-year-old Hannibal running after Rome with his cute little wooden sword. But I digress. This dramatic event, known as Hannibal's Oath, is said to have taken place in Peñascola, now part of the Valencian community in Spain. Spain, you might be thinking. Well, you see, Carthage had many territories up the northern coast of Africa and around Spain on the Iberian Peninsula. They still had overseas territories out of their main area of control. After his father's death in battle, Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, assumed command of the Carthaginian army in Hispania. Hannibal, at the age of 18, served as an officer under Hasdrubal. Hasdrubal focused on consolidating Carthage's interests in Iberia, before forming diplomatic ties and signing a treaty with Rome that set boundaries along the Ebro River. What would Hannibal's father say about all this? One can only imagine. Following Hasdrubal's assassination in 221 BC, 26-year-old Hannibal was proclaimed commander-in-chief by the army and confirmed in official capacity by Carthage. The Roman scholar Livy portrayed Hannibal as reminiscent of his father Hamilcar, noting the resemblance in appearance and spirit. He exhibited the same qualities of leadership, facing opposition with skill, while adeptly navigating between obedience and command. After consolidating his power and completing the conquest of Hispania, Hannibal married a woman from Castulo, a powerful city allied with Carthage. She was likely named Imilce. Their union was mentioned by Livy, while Silius Italicus suggested a Greek origin for Imilce. And please try not to giggle at the name Silius Italicus. It does not mean silly Italian, but we can pretend it does. Now, another scholar, Gilbert Charles Picard, argued that she was not of Greek origin. Rather, she was of Punic origin. Punic is the term that we use to refer to Carthaginians, as that is how Rome was referring to them. In his initial campaigns, Hannibal attacked strongholds like Elythia and Helmantice, showcasing his tactical prowess. Upon returning home, a coalition of Spanish tribes led by the Carpetani attacked, leading to Hannibal's first significant battlefield success at the Battle of the River Tagus. Fearing Hannibal's growing strength in Iberia, Rome formed an alliance with Saguntum, claiming it as a protectorate and breaching the treaty with Carthage. Hannibal, planning an attack on Rome, saw the siege of Saguntum as a just cause for war and used it as his casus belli. That's a war justification. The city fell after 8 months, and Hannibal sent the booty to Carthage, gaining crucial support. You know, you become quite popular when you send back boatloads and boatloads of treasure. It really justifies the living away from home expenses that the people in charge are giving you. Now, of course, Rome was not too pleased with all this. In response, they dispatched a delegation led by Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus to demand Carthage's stance on Hannibal's actions. The Carthaginian Senate, using legal arguments, questioned the validity of the alleged violated treaty. When asked to choose between war and peace, the Carthaginian audience replied that Rome could decide. Do you want to guess what they decided? I'm sure you decided to choose war, which is exactly what Quintus Fabius chose. So, if the Romans wanted war, the Carthaginians were going to bring it, and bring it hard. They did. And this is where Hannibal began to make preparations to cross the Alps. The plan to invade Italy was initially conceived by Hannibal's brother-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, who served as a Carthaginian general in the Iberian Peninsula. However, as you already know, he was assassinated in 221 BC, and Hannibal was the new guy in charge. The Romans, having dealt with the threat of a Gallo-Carthaginian invasion, were completely unaware of Hannibal's plans. Hannibal departed Cartagena, Spain, in the late spring of 218. But it wasn't easy. In fact, along the way, he faced challenges in subduing northern tribes and crossing the Pyrenees. Despite releasing 11,000 Iberian troops at the Pyrenees, Hannibal's army still consisted of 40,000 foot soldiers, 12,000 horsemen, and 38 elephants upon reaching the Rhone in September 218 BC. Recognizing the obstacles ahead, including the Alps, and the Gauls who were not very happy to see him, Hannibal strategically navigated the challenges, conciliating Gaulish chiefs and arriving at the Rhone before any Roman interference. His army, although diminished, comprised 38,000 infantry, 8,000 cavalry, and the elephants. Now, the elephants would become very important, but it is difficult to make an elephant walk up the daunting condition of a mountain. Well, that is exactly what Hannibal had to do. He skillfully outmaneuvered both natives and a Roman force to cross the Rhone Valley and advance towards the daunting Alpine crossing. The exact route he took over the Alps remains a subject of scholarly debate, with theories proposing different paths. There's really no way to know for sure, and perhaps one day we will find more solid archaeological evidence, as things are always left behind. Some modern theories suggest a march up the valley of Drôme, crossing the main range south of the Col de Montgevir. Others argue for a route farther north up the valleys of the Isère and Arc, crossing the main range near the present Col de Mont-Cenis or Little St. Bernard Pass. Recent numismatic evidence indicates that Hannibal's army may have passed within the site of the Matterhorn. Numismatic? That means the study of coins. They found money. Scholars, including geoarchaeologist Patrick Hunt, propose different routes, suggesting that the Col de Clapier as the most accurate based on ancient depictions of the route. Others argue in favor of the Col de la Traversette, supported by biostratigraphic archaeological data. The analysis of peat bogs near the watercourses on both sides of the pass's summit revealed disturbances by humans and animals. Radiocarbon dating secured dates of around 218 BC, aligning with Hannibal's march. Archaeologists contend that this, combined with other evidence, strongly supports the Col de la Traversette as the Hannibalic route. Polybius also mentioned the highest Alpine pass, the Col de la Traversette, as Hannibal's likely crossing, reinforcing the case. In either way, it is certainly not as difficult as the route your parents took to school when they were your age. In summary, the debate continues, but recent evidence and interpretations lean towards the likelihood that Hannibal crossed the Alps through this path. Hannibal faced significant challenges during his Alpine crossing. overcoming them with ingenious strategies, as Livy describes. For instance, he reportedly used vinegar and fire to navigate a rock fall. Now that shows some resourcefulness. While Polybius provides different figures, suggesting Hannibal arrived in Italy with 20,000 foot soldiers, 4,000 horsemen, and only a few elephants, Livy's account includes details not mentioned by Polybius, leading to historical debates about the accuracy of troop numbers who he actually managed to guide over the Alps. But either way, when he got over there were many soldiers with him. Hannibal's military vision, shaped by Greek tutors and experiences with his father, extended across much of the Hellenistic world. His grand strategy involved conquering Rome by opening a northern front and subduing allied city-states on the Italian peninsula, rather than a direct assault on Rome. The defeat of Carthage in the First Punic War influenced Hannibal's decision to invade Italy by land across the Alps. This ambitious plan required the mobilization of 60,000 to 100,000 troops, and bringing those elephants with you certainly needed some experts. Hannibal's audacious march into Roman territory shifted the battleground and disrupted the Roman strategy. His sudden appearance among the Gauls of the Po Valley allowed him to sway these tribes away from their Roman allegiance before Rome could even respond. Publius Cornelius Scipio, the consul leading the Roman force to intercept Hannibal, was caught off guard, not anticipating an attempt to cross the Alps. Scipio, taken by surprise, attempted to intercept Hannibal, but was outmaneuvered. The Battle of Ticinus ensued, where Hannibal's superior cavalry forced the Romans to retreat. A little embarrassing for the Romans, for sure. Now, while this was a relatively minor victory, it managed to rally support from the Gauls and the Ligurians, boosting Hannibal's army to around 40,000 men. Scipio, severely injured, was rescued by his son, and the Romans retreated to Placentia. The Roman Senate was obviously in uproar about this. Responding swiftly, they ordered Consul Tiberius Longus to bring his army back from Sicily to reinforce Scipio. Hannibal, though, was pretty clever. I think you already know, and perhaps will know a little more about. He skillfully positioned himself to intercept Sempronius' captured Clastidium for supplies. Despite all of this, Sempronius managed to evade Hannibal's maneuvers, joining Scipio near the Trebia River. In December of the same year, Hannibal showcased his military brilliance at the Battle of Trebia. After wearing down the superior Roman infantry, he executed a surprise attack and ambushed from the flanks, cutting the Roman forces to pieces. During the winter of 217 BC, Hannibal quartered his troops with the Gauls. However, their support was beginning to wane, and Hannibal became to get a little bit scared of assassination attempts. Well, he wasn't going to take any of these threats and perceived dangers lying down, so to counter this, he adopted a cunning strategy. You wouldn't believe it, he began to wear wigs. That's right, he began to wear wigs, and he was constantly changing the wigs to thwart his would-be assassins. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that extremely amusing. In the spring of 217 BC, Hannibal sought a more reliable base of operations, prompting him to move farther south. The Roman consuls, Servilius and Flaminius, anticipated Hannibal's advance on Rome and strategically blocked the eastern and western routes. The only viable alternative lay at the mouth of the Arno, a marshy area overflowing more than usual during the season. Despite the challenges, Hannibal's forces marched for 4 days and 3 nights through waterlogged terrain, crossing the Apennines and the seemingly impassable Arno. While successfully traversing these obstacles, a significant portion of his force was lost in the marshy lowlands. Arriving in Etruria in the spring of 217 BC, Hannibal aimed to lure the main Roman army, led by Flamininus, into a pitched battle by devastating the region Flamininus was meant to protect. Despite these efforts, Flaminius remained encamped at Arretium. Hannibal executed a turning movement, marching boldly around Flaminius's left flank, and caught him in a defile on the shore of Lake Trasimenius. There, Hannibal ambushed Flaminius's army, destroying it in the waters or on the slopes, marking one of the most costly ambushes in Roman history. With Flaminius defeated, Hannibal recognized the impossibility of directly attacking Rome without siege engines. Instead, he opted to exploit his victory by entering central and southern Italy, encouraging a general revolt against Roman rule. Now, just quickly, this is quite early in the history of the Roman Republic, and at this time, Rome was quite different to Italy. There were many civil wars in Italy, and earlier Rome had just conquered many parts of it. Many people felt that Romans and Italians, or Etruscans as we can call them, were of a different culture. Of course, later on, people would become somewhat more accustomed to it. But if you ask Italians, even in our modern day, if Romans are the same as people from other cities, I'm sure they could tell you a few differences. So, the Romans were obviously not very impressed by this, and they were having rather a rough time of it. In response to Hannibal's victories, the Romans appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus as their dictator. Dictator meaning someone who has absolute power to make all the decisions. It wasn't such of a dirty word back in the ancient times. Departing from conventional Roman military tactics, Fabius adopted a defensive strategy that came to be named after him. Instead of engaging Hannibal in open battle, he positioned several Roman armies in Hannibal's vicinity to observe and limit his movements. Many dirty tricks and guerrilla warfare. That was what Fabius was all about. Hannibal, unable to draw Fabius into a proper battle between gentlemen, ravaged Apulia, and then marched through Samnium to Campania, hoping to force Fabius into action through devastation. However, Fabius closely followed Hannibal's destructive path while maintaining a defensive stance. This strategy, deemed cautious by Fabius, was criticized by many Romans who viewed it as a form of cowardice. As winter approached, Hannibal found himself trapped in the devastated lowlands of Campania, as Fabius had blocked all the exit passes. This situation led to the night battle of Agathocles. Hannibal devised a cunning plan. By tying burning torches to the horns of cattle and driving them up nearby heights, tricking some Romans into pursuing what they believed to be the Carthaginian army. Seizing the opportunity, Hannibal quietly moved his entire army through an unguarded pass. Although Fabius within striking distance, his caution worked against him, and Hannibal successfully escaped, dealing a blow to Fabius's prestige and marking the end of Fabius's dictatorial power. No one was going to be taking him seriously after that. In the spring of 216 BC, Hannibal strategically seized the supply depot at Cannae, placing himself between the Romans and their crucial supply sources. The Romans, under consuls Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus, raised an unprecedentedly large army to confront Hannibal. Estimates range from 50 to 80,000, with some even suggesting even 100,000. That's a lot of guys. They really wanted to wipe Hannibal out. The Romans marched southward to Apulia and found Hannibal encamped on the left bank of the Orfitus River. The two consuls alternated command daily, with Varro leading on the day of battle. Hannibal capitalized on the Romans' eagerness, using an envelopment tactic to draw them into a trap. The Carthaginian general strategically placed his least reliable infantry in the center, luring the Romans in. Meanwhile, his cavalry on the flanks dealt with their Roman counterparts, rendering the Roman numerical advantage completely ineffective. Although the Roman legions initially forced their way through Hannibal's center, the Libyan mercenaries on the wings swung round, menacing the flanks. Hannibal's cavalry, led by the reliable Hannibal and Hanno, proved unbeatable, shattering the Roman cavalry and attacking the legions from behind. This resulted in the Roman army being hemmed in with no means of escape. Of course, the Romans were very panicked about this and got completely massacred. The Battle of Cannae became one of the most famous tactical masterpieces in military history, showcasing Hannibal's strategic brilliance and decisiveness. Hannibal's brilliant tactics at the Battle of Cannae resulted in the near destruction of the Roman army, with estimates of 50 to 70,000 Romans killed or captured. Among the casualties were the consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus, 2 consuls from the preceding year, 2 quaestors, 29 of the 48 military tribunes, and an additional 80 senators, constituting a significant loss for the Roman Senate. The devastating defeat led to Roman hesitation in confronting Hannibal in pitched battles, with a preference for attrition to weaken him. The Romans relied on their advantages of interior lines of supply and manpower. Hannibal, despite his triumph, faced challenges such as a lack of commitment from Carthage in terms of men, money, and siege equipment. Consequently, he did not bring the war directly to Rome. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. If the mood within the Carthaginian Senate had have been a little different, some more support for Hannibal, and they had said to themselves, you know what? Let's wipe out Rome once and for all. They probably could have done it. And our world would have looked very different. Well, maybe the alternate history is for another channel to deal with. Marhabal's famous remark, Hannibal, you know how to gain a victory, but not how to use one, underscores the missed opportunity to capitalize on the triumph at Cannae. Despite gaining support in many parts of Italy and inducing revolts in Sicily and Macedonia, Hannibal could not receive the necessary reinforcements for a direct assault on the capital of Rome. Instead, he focused on subduing fortresses and securing alliances, notably with the newly appointed tyrant Hieronymus of Syracuse, and the defection of certain Italian territories, including Capua, which became Hannibal's new base. However, only a few Italian city-states defected to him. This fell very short of his expectations. The war in Italy entered a strategic stalemate, as the Romans, influenced by Fabius' strategy of attrition, deprived Hannibal of large-scale battles, and instead engaged him in multiple smaller campaigns to weaken him. Fabius, nicknamed the Delayer, avoided open confrontation, and just continued to wear Hannibal down, little by little. Hannibal was not going to take this lying down, and he certainly didn't. He resorted to a scorched earth policy, and struggled with limited support from Carthage and its new ally, Philip V of Macedon. Despite some victories, Hannibal faced challenges, losing ground due to inadequate backing from Italian allies, abandonment by Carthage, and an inability to match Rome's vast resources. Carthaginian political dynamics played a crucial role, with power concentrated in the oligarchy, including the Council of 30 nobles and the 104. 2 factions, the war party led by the Barcids, Hannibal's family, and the peace party led by Hanno II the Great, operated in Carthage on equal footing. Hanno, instrumental in denying Hannibal reinforcements after Cannae, represented the peace party. Hannibal started the war without full support from the Carthaginian oligarchy, which controlled its strategic resources. Despite Hannibal's constant requests for reinforcements, the oligarchy prioritized reinforcing and supplying Iberia over supporting Hannibal directly. Hannibal faced challenges as he struggled with less trained mercenaries and the oligarchy's commercial interests. In March of 212, Hannibal captured Tarentum in a surprise attack. But despite this, Rome's tide was turning against him. The battle is turning in our favor. You must comment if you know the reference. The Roman consuls sieged Capua in 212 BC, prompting Hannibal to attack and force their withdrawal. He then moved to Lucania, defeating a Roman army at the Battle of Silarus and another at the First Battle of Herdonia. In 211 BC, Rome successfully sieged Capua. Hannibal attempted to lift the siege, but he failed, marching on Rome to draw off Roman soldiers. Despite some tactical victories in Apulia, Hannibal's hold on South Italy began to weaken with the loss of Tarentum in 209. In 207, he aimed for a combined march on Rome with his brother Hasdrubal, but retired to Calabria upon hearing of Hasdrubal's defeat and his death in the Battle of Metaurus. The events marked the end of Hannibal's success in Italy. With the decline of Carthage's fortunes and the failure of his brother Mago in Liguria, Hannibal's hope of recovering ascendancy in Italy had vanished. In 203, after almost 15 years of fighting in Italy, he was recalled to Carthage to defend against a Roman invasion under Scipio Africanus. In 203 BC, Hannibal was recalled to Carthage from Italy by the war party. After leaving a record of his expedition in the temple of Juno Lacinta in Crotona, he sailed back to Africa. His return boosted the war party's influence, and he took command of a combined force of African levies and Italian mercenaries. In 202 BC, Hannibal engaged in a fruitless peace conference with Scipio, despite their mutual admiration. Negotiations failed due to Roman allegations of Punic faith, citing breaches of protocols in the First Punic War. A peace plan was worked out, but was rejected by Carthage. The decisive Battle of Zama followed, resulting in Hannibal's defeat and the removal of his aura of invincibility. At the Battle of Zama, a pivotal engagement in the Second Punic War, the Romans held superiority in cavalry, thanks to the betrayal of Massinissa, a former Carthaginian ally, who changed sides. Despite Hannibal's mental exhaustion and deteriorating health, the Carthaginians had an infantry advantage, and not to mention 80 war elephants. We are in Africa after all. The Roman cavalry, though, swiftly routed the Carthaginian cavalry and effectively countered the war elephants by playing trumpets to frighten them. And frightened they were as they stampeded away. The battle remained closely fought, and at one point Hannibal seemed on the verge of victory. Scipio, though, rallied his men, and a two-pronged attack by the Romans caused the Carthaginian formation to collapse. With their general defeated, the Carthaginians surrendered, losing approximately 20,000 troops and 15,000 wounded. In contrast, the Romans suffered a mere 2,500 casualties. The Battle of Zama therefore marked the end of Hannibal's military career, and Carthage's ability to challenge Rome for Mediterranean supremacy. After the Second Punic War, Hannibal became a statesman and was elected suffect in Carthage. He initiated financial reforms to eliminate corruption and recovered embezzled funds. This diminished the power of the oligarchs. Suspected of conspiring against Rome, Hannibal fled into voluntary exile to avoid Roman demands for his surrender. He journeyed to Tyre, Antioch, and Ephesus, where he advised Antiochus III and attended a lecture by Phormio. Tensions rose between Seleucids and Rome, and Hannibal proposed an anti-Roman coup in Carthage. This coup, however, did not materialize. Sometime later, in 190, after defeats in the Roman-Seleucid War, Antiochus gave Hannibal a military command. He built a fleet, but suffered defeat in the Battle of Side and the Battle of Myonessus, leading to a decisive Roman Pergamene victory in the Battle of Magnesia. The truce signed at Sardes in 189 BC forced Antiochus to surrender Hannibal to Rome. He briefly sought refuge in the Armenian royal court, then fled to Crete and returned to Anatolia, where he served Prusias I of Bithynia in warfare against Rome's ally, Eumenes II of Pergamon. The circumstances surrounding Hannibal's death are uncertain. Pausanias mentioned a wound on Hannibal's finger caused by his drawn sword while mounting his horse, leading to a fatal fever 3 days later. Other sources, like Livy and Cornelius Nepos, present a different account, suggesting that Flaminius demanded Hannibal's surrender from King Prusias, prompting Hannibal to take poison upon realizing escape was possible. Impossible, rather. Appian proposed that Prusias poisoned Hannibal himself. Could be. Whichever way it happened, Hannibal's tomb was said to be at Libisa, on the sea of the Marmara coast, although some believe it was at Gebze, while others place it even further west of this. His date of death is variously dated between 183 and 181. Perhaps we can settle on 182 and be done with the issue. Dear listeners, we've reached the end of today's video about Hannibal Barca. And what a man he was. Certainly a nightmare for the Romans. I've been your host today, the ASMR Historian. Thank you dearly for joining me in today's video. It's been a pleasure. If you like the content, make sure that you subscribe and perhaps leave your comments down below. Always appreciate it. But for now, I'm going to wish you good night. I'll see you next time.